Matt, it is so good to have you down on the Awesome Marriage Podcast. Thank you for taking time to be with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Well, the book gets really real and making sure about Lead Me isn't just a song lyric, but really the way you live and the intentions in that process. So talk a little about the circumstances really that just led to the song Lead Me, which I know has impacted so many people over the years.
Yeah, thanks. In probably 2007 or 2008, I had been on the road full time after marrying my wife, Sarah. And she was with me for the first 4 years. So in 2005, she left the road. And it really felt like kind of a departure of our dream, of being on the road together. She
Yeah.
went home because we had our first daughter. And then I kind of continued this adventure that we were once on together, but now I was doing this with the band while she was at home. So we were really trying to adjust to this season of, well, first I'll say it took a long time to adjust to the communication, living on the road, how to be married and how to communicate and how to be intimate, how to fight, all that stuff.
Yeah.
While we're living in a van with a bunch of guys. Now we're kind of in this whole new phase where she's at home, I'm on the road, and now we're trying to find a new way of communication. So a lot of
Yeah.
times I would really get home and things would just really explode for us. Our
Mm.
communication barrier was so big, and it felt like when we tried to tear down that barrier between us, it was almost like we were like building that wall even higher. And we felt really helpless in a lot of ways. And I remember one time in particular that Sarah asked me if we could talk. And really, through tears, she expressed to me that she needed me to kind of step up and be a
Mm.
better leader in our marriage. And, not just kind of coast through to survive. She really wanted me to take initiative to be the kind of man that pursued her
Mm.
emotionally and spiritually and got active about finding the solutions that we needed to make our marriage stronger.
Mm.
And I think I had lived with an imaginary version of myself for a really long time, that the intentions that I had of the kind of man that I wanted to be, maybe that reel had played in my head so much that I was embracing the intentions and the imaginations of who I wanted to be more
Yeah.
than actually living those things out. So I really had to have kind of a breaking from my imagined self and face that and really see who I was in reality, in action. And so, um, I realized that day that my good intentions were worthless until they became actions.
Mm.
And based on the reality of what God was calling me to and what Sarah really needed from me. And so that day I picked up the guitar and actually wrote the first draft of the song that became Lead Me, and had no idea how that song would go on to impact other marriages as well.
So many people, so many people. So I think it's interesting that Sarah. It says a lot about her that she was the one who brought it to you and confronted you with that, which probably wasn't really easy for her to do, or maybe it is since I don't know her. But how did the fact that she would? What would she say prompted her to do that?
Yeah, well, that's one thing I've really appreciated so much about Sarah is it's her willingness to not allow things to just slide
Yeah,
relationally. I'm built in a way that I'd rather kind of tuck things away for a while and they get to the
yeah,
point where they'd boil over. Whereas she's just not willing to do that. And for a long time, that really bothered me. For a long time, I thought, why do we have to discuss all these little things as they come up? And um, I think I used to think she was fighting against me, but I've come to realize that she was fighting for me
mm,
all these years and fighting for our relationship. And so she definitely is somebody who's always been willing not only to do that with me, but she's been willing to do that with friends and family as well. Willing to take on hard conversations, even though she doesn't really want to, but out of the belief that in the end, it will bring her closer to the people that she loves. And
yeah.
that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I've learned from her over the years.
Yeah, I love what you said about think that because I think a lot of times as guys we finally realize that our wives aren't fighting us; they're fighting for this marriage. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes we have a tendency to just like, why are we talking about this again? Why are you bringing stuff up again? And not realizing how much they want things to be better for both
Yeah.
of us in that.
Yeah.
So that's really, really good. The other thing you said, I wanted to go back to just a second. Your when you talked about your imagined self, was there anything that was key in helping you realize that this is not who I am, or this is not the life that I'm living?
Well, definitely was a process. So it's probably a number of things that kind of helped me um realize that. I mean, honestly, I could say it was it was the contrast for me. It was the contrast of my wife in the wedding picture next to me versus who was sitting across the table from me.
Wow.
That actually was what really did it for me. Um, and I write about it in the song, in picture frames. I see my beautiful wife always smiling, but on the inside, I can hear her saying, "Lead me." Those were actually lyrics I wrote that day from that moment because I was looking at that picture and she's glowing and she has this sense of anticipation on her face and excitement and expectancy for what God was going to do as she followed this man into
Yeah.
her future. And here I am 7 years later, and I'm like, the woman sitting across from me is completely broken.
Mm.
And I think that is what made me wake up and go, okay, like I know that it takes two in a marriage, right, to make things work, but I know for a fact that I'm called to step up and proactively figure out what is it that I am doing in this marriage that has caused this woman to feel broken.
Yeah.
And that is real. And I think realizing that her pain was real and being able to take her pain into my heart is what
Mm.
allowed me to actually face what is it about my imagination of who I am that if I was living it would have a different outcome.
Mm.
And obviously I'm not living that the way that I think I am or want to. And so I think that was a big part of it for
Yeah.
me, taking her true feelings to heart and realizing if I was doing my job there, um, not that she wouldn't still have hurt, but perhaps would be in a better place, you know?
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing because I think it's something a lot of times as guys we deal with. I mean, you were
Yeah.
successful on the road, music was successful. I think a lot of guys were successful in our work, and we just don't take our time to really look at how does our wife. I love the fact that you look back at a wedding picture and saw something in her then. I think it's a great idea for all of us as men to just look back at that and then look at our wife now and does she look like that?
Yeah.
Does she have that glow, that excitement about being a part of our life. That's awesome. Let's switch a little bit over to Bowen and his health and what what they needed from you, I guess, at that time as the leader of your home. When tell a little bit about that story.
Yeah. So, really shortly after the song Lead Me came out to radio and we started experiencing some of what people were feeling from that song and how it was impacting people, I had felt that there was maybe this sense of, wow, we learned this lesson. We're still on this journey, but it's amazing to see our story and our marriage impacting people in a positive way, right?
Mm,
We all want to see our pain have some sort of redemption. And it did feel like we were kind of hitting this pace where it was like, okay, maybe things are getting better. We're growing in our marriage and impacting more people. The band was growing. So it was really hard when we got delivered another series of bad news. Um, we went to the doctor and found out at a 20-week ultrasound that our third baby was a boy, which was awesome because our little girls were very excited to have a brother. But we also found out that he only had half of his heart.
mm,
So from April to September of 2010, we really had to just wait and pray and had no idea what life was going to look like for us, except for that after he was born, if he survived, he would have to have multiple open heart surgeries. And so we knew life was changing
mm,
for us. And the real irony in that season was the song Lead Me that I had written about being a more present husband and father, that message was so powerful during that time, really for me in my life, because my family really needed me through this trial. But the irony was that the song I had written about being more present, ultimately, the success of it took me away from home even more.
Mm,
And so that was a really complicated
yeah.
season of life where I started really grappling with an even deeper level of who I was and what I was called to do for my family.
Were there any things particular that you felt that were just that you were struggling with there that were like keeping you from be- doing the things with leading your family like you knew that you wanted to?
Yeah. I think one of the things that was really hard for Sarah and I in that time that maybe clouded our ability to clearly see how to connect and how to lead as parents was our grief. We
Mm,
really probably should have been in some sort of grief counseling through all of this. And we really grieved in separate ways. Sarah grieved by being completely engrossed in all the details of Bowen's medical care. So she wanted to be, before he was born, she wanted to be all in, just studying his condition. Uh, it was really, and I'm not even saying it in a bad way, but it was an obsession for her, and that's
sure,
how she grieved
sure.
through it, was to be proactive. And even after he was born, being at his bedside 24 hours a day,
Mm,
being present and invested was her way of fighting through the grief. Whereas for me, I needed to process. I'm an artist, so I needed to process more through words and music and taking those moments away to pray and reflect and write. And, when I would try to pull her away from the bedside, she would think, well, how could you try to pull me away even for an hour or two from our sick child, right? And then it's like, and I would think, well, how can you not come away? I don't feel
yeah,
like I have a wife right now. And so we would really, it was a big strain on us. And I think some of those tensions of that grief made it very hard to see clearly and how we could come together and really make it through, and only by the grace of God and the support of others around us did we get through that. And thank God we didn't. It actually ultimately brought us together
yeah.
instead of tearing us apart.
Because I think that happens a lot, certainly when a child is sick or you hear the death of a child, that it really takes a toll on the marriage. I think the way you and the way you grieve differently was so different. And it wasn't like, in counseling couples, I say, there's not a right or wrong way to grieve. You just
Yeah.
have to do it. And you may do it different than your spouse does. And you guys did grieve differently. How long was Bowen in the hospital? How long was that period of time?
Yeah. So that first period of time was over 4 months that
Oh,
we
wow.
spent in the hospital. So 4 out of the first 6 months of his life through two open heart surgeries before we were able to go back home and start getting back to normal.
Wow. That's a long time,
It is.
especially with the stress and all that comes with that. Uh, so when you, at that point, you're faced with the decisions, obviously, but what really prompted you to say, okay, I'm going to set this dream aside for a while and put my family ahead of everything, really, but the Lord?
Yep. I really started struggling with that tension shortly after Bowen's birth. At that time, I couldn't sense what the answer was. I felt like we were kind of on this hamster wheel in a way,
Mm,
right? The career, and everybody feels that way to some degree, and sometimes that can be good that you're moving, and you're it's I guess hamster wheel isn't a great analogy because you're not really actually going anywhere,
yeah,
but in terms of the feeling of how do I get out of the cycle that I'm in, that I
yeah,
know is unhealthy for me and for my family.
yeah.
It was the sole source of my income. It was my sole artistic expression with the band that I'd had since I was 16 years old.
Wow.
And so it was really a number of years 3 or 4 years still that I had, that I was on the road after Bowen was born, that it began to take more and more of a toll on me. And I just think experiencing burnout and experiencing seasons and cycles that were continuously difficult for me and Sarah, and really realizing that it was the way that I was living my life that
Mm,
was at the heart of the tension that we were consistently experiencing. My buddy Brian always says, like, guys come to him and they say, my life is crazy, and I'm working 80 hours and I'm gone all the time, and sometimes we develop, or they develop, this victim mentality, like, oh, it's just so hard. And he's, I really actually appreciate his attitude towards it, because, like, man, I don't feel bad for him. He's like, nobody put a gun to your head and said, hey, you have to work 80 hours. You have to, like, get on the wheel and go and, like, work this hard and grind this hard. Like, you can blow your life up in a good way. You can say,
yeah,
hey, you know what? I'm burning the ships, that I'm tied to, that are not good for me or my family, that are unhealthy. And I can make new decisions about how we live our lives that honor God and honor family in a much bigger way. And so it was men like that in my life that started
yeah,
making me go, you know what? I don't have to live this way, and God will take care of me if I make the right decisions. And I knew in my heart the right decision for me over those years. It became more and more clear finally by 2000, end of 2014, moving into 15. I had to sit down with the guys and I told them, hey, I've been at odds. I've had this tension. I know that this lifestyle is not the healthiest for me and for my marriage and family. And I know that God's calling me out of this. Very difficult conversation. I write
I can
about it
imagine.
in great detail in the book. The guys were obviously hurt. It was very hard. We grew up together. I was the face of the band.
Yeah,
So I felt my biggest fear was, what will everybody do without me? I'm the singer of the band. And I remember that still small voice in my spirit just reminding me that I'm not the only child of God that he loves.
yeah,
He'll take care of
yeah.
everybody else just like he'll take care of me. And that is not my responsibility. And I shouldn't think more of myself than I ought. And so, um, yeah, it was a hard decision, but here we are today. It's been almost 5 years now since I've been gone. Well,
Wow.
5 or 6 years. Yeah.
I want to go back to when you were talking about being on the road, and you said this earlier, and then you talked again about going on the road. But that when you would come back home, how difficult that was sometimes for you and Sarah to get back on the same page again.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that, because
Yeah. So
I think a lot of guys deal with that.
absolutely. It's that, the reentry into the home once you've been gone, right? And Sarah, and I'm sure, so like you said, so many men relate to this when they travel or are working long hours, that your family is kind of forced for survival's sake to get into a pattern that works for them
Yeah,
without you always available. And when you kind of get back in to where you're like, hey, I'm here, and it's outside of the typical pattern or routine, in a way, you're kind of messing things up for them, And so
yeah,
you feel
yeah.
that tension of like, okay, we have to find a new routine. And how do I lovingly put myself back into this routine and still learn how to respect the fact that they've been, because of my decisions, kind of forced to find ways to live without me.
Sure.
And yeah, how do I now lovingly try to navigate that and be present, but also be mindful of that transition? And I think, for me, I failed so hard so many times at that. And it was so frustrating for me at times. And it really did take a good long while for us to find that pattern again. But it was worth it, because once we found it, there was so much reward in it.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I've in couples, I think of a couple couples I've dealt with in similar situations, and the wife saying to me, we're doing really good and we're clicking along, and then he comes home and then everything goes again, and then he
Yeah.
leaves again, and then we get all messed up and then we leave again. So I think that is a real challenge for any men that are in that situation.
Yeah, it is.
But again, it just takes, I think, probably communication and how do we make this work? Because
Yes.
God wants it to work.
And again, the willingness to have those conversations even when they're hard. Again,
Absolutely.
that thing that Sarah has done so well to teach me over the years that I'm finally getting down, the willingness to engage in those conversations and hear her and hear what she has to say and take it to heart.
Absolutely. It's amazing what our wives have, all the wisdom they have. We
Oh
just
yeah,
have to finally begin to value that
that's right.
and listen. Okay, so we talked about telling the band, stepping aside. What has God done since you were obedient to that? When you said, okay, God, I'm going to let go of this and I am going to do what I think you want me to do.
Yeah. So much unexpected blessing has come from this decision. I do kind of like I personally look at Peter and him stepping out of that boat into an unknown way of walking on the water. How terrifying that must have been to want to go to where Jesus was
Mm,
and to like just know that your only hope is to just say, okay, my eyes are on you and I'm going to walk and put the full weight of this life into something that seems unstable, knowing that only you can carry me. And I think I really felt that it was like stepping away from this career I had known for so long. And it was hard to get the other foot out of the boat. I kind of wanted to keep
sure.
one in for a while. But when I finally started walking, every single step felt like a miracle. So even just that of God's provision, uh, taking care of our family, even though I didn't know what that would look like financially and just ministry wise, giving me opportunity to use my voice and my gifts in new ways that I never anticipated. That's been the biggest blessing is as I've just opened my hands and said, okay, Lord, what do you have for me now in this season? He's brought some really amazing relationships. One of the first doors that opened was my friend Bob Lapine from who used to be with Family Life Ministries, called me and said, "Hey Matt, would you consider coming out and speaking for our Family Life Weekend to Remember conferences a few times a year and join our team?" And I just said, I felt like it was supposed to be yes. And then I met so many people there. And then Kirk Cameron called and said, "Hey, you want to come be part of this marriage and family event that I'm doing?" And once a month for 3 years, we were on a tour bus together and gotten to make several albums still. I got to write the book Lead Me, which I never would have gotten to do.
Yeah.
And one of the coolest things that we did most recently was we made a documentary called Bowen's Heart that is just came out. It was accepted into the Nashville Film Festival in 2020.
Wow.
And, now we've gotten to share the intricacies of our story and give people a very vulnerable look at what our life is like with a child with chronic illness in hopes of showing other families they're not alone and showing them how over time we've learned to take this what would be perceived as brokenness, but only in God's grace he can actually use it instead of tearing us apart to pull us back together as a family. And so Bowen's Heart's actually it's out now everywhere you watch or rent movies, Apple,
Awesome.
Amazon, and Google and all that. So kind of neat to see that out in the world and getting stories now of how something that's not just me on a platform singing, but it's our whole family together having a
Yeah.
ministry. And to see what God's doing with that is such a blessing.
It's just amazing how what God does, when he leads us from, led you out of the band, out of all of that, and then what the blessings he's given you. And I just hear that story all the time. I think it's just hard sometimes for us to take that step of obedience
Absolutely.
that you were willing to take. But hopefully this encourages people to say, yeah, I can do that too. I can
Yeah,
take that
that's right.
step and trust God. It certainly is a step of faith for sure. Just I love your analogy going back to Peter and getting out of the boat. Absolutely. And to get both feet out of the boat. I think I would be more like you. I would try to have one foot in and one foot out and say, hey, can I balance things this
Yeah.
way? And when God wants both feet out,
Yep.
for sure. So some men that may be listening and they're thinking, I think I want to move in that direction. where would they start? What are some practical steps to leading well, to being the leader God wants us to be as husbands?
Yeah. I think it really does go back um, first to allowing God to take away those delusions that we have about who we are, like we already talked
Mm,
about. Um, what part of me in my life am I kind of holding on to for the sake of self deception so I can survive where I am now? That
mm,
deception could be, maybe believing I am somebody who I'm not as a father or a husband, or maybe that delusion is I have to remain where I am because if I don't, then there will be everything will fall apart. We all have those. Uh, we all self deceive as a
yeah,
coping
yeah.
mechanism. And I think that is really important to say, who am I really now versus who I'm meant to become? Who does God want to make me? And I think asking those hard questions certainly is part of it. I think also developing ears to hear.
Mhm.
Um, for a long time, and even still at times, gosh, I don't always want to hear the hard things that my wife has to say to me or that other people have to say to me.
Yeah,
But being willing to ask hard questions, even of our friends and other men in our lives, how can I grow? How can I improve? What do you think about my situation, where I'm meant to go? Um, and then, yeah, allowing our the ears of our hearts to be open to what um, God is saying to us first, and then what also our wives are saying to us. I think is so important. And I, man, if there are men out there who are feeling the call, like what, I am called to make a change in my life for the better, for the health of my marriage or family. I would just be a testimony to them to say that it 100% is worth it. Stepping out with 2 feet and walking on the water and keeping your eyes on Jesus and experiencing the miracle of faith and the blessing that comes with it. So that would be my encouragement.
absolutely. And I love the fact, that I think we need people in our life that love us enough to walk with us through that, or
Yeah.
to say the things to us that might be hard for us to hear. But I think when we've got somebody that we know really loves us and believes like we do, God really uses those people in our lives, whether it's Sarah or friends or people like that. And I think sometimes as guys, we have a tendency to want to do it alone.
Yes.
And I think God always puts people around to walk with us, and God obviously provided that for you.
Yeah, what you said is absolutely right about isolation and wanting to do it alone. It's so important for men to develop that community and seek community and to be the kind of friend that they wish to have in order to develop that community as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about the wives that would be listening now that might be frustrated, that might be discouraged. They want their husband to engage with the family. What advice would you give them, or maybe speaking some from Sarah's point of view? What would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, I guess, man, it's so difficult to know exactly what to say, but I think that the willingness to still engage. Um, there's two sides to the engagement, right? In communication, when
Mm,
there's hard things to hear. It is that old book by Emerson Eggerichs, Love and Respect. It's a classic because it is so true that as a fundamental need, of course, we all need love, but there's that certain kind of love that a woman needs from her husband, and there also is kind of a fundamental respect that is just kind of desired by a man in his heart. So when you approach a man about what you need, I think number one, it is loving and respectful, right? To like of the marriage, even and of the relationship, to want to say, hey, I have some needs, I have some things that I want you to consider. But then on the other side of that is the approach. And I think that's something even Sarah would say she's still learning, how do I approach Matt? And in the tone and the tenor um, that can bring about, or I guess is less likely to create that defensive spirit, right, in the
mhm.
conversation. Um, and so, but I do think sometimes us guys can hear something we don't want to hear, even when it's respectful. And have a spirit of defense about it because
Yeah.
we don't want to change. So I would also say just be patient with us. It takes
Yeah.
men a lot longer to hear things. Sometimes it's like in and out. We really got to learn to open up the ears of our hearts. And lastly, I'd say, so I would say don't be afraid to speak and be truthful about what you need. Take a loving and respectful approach. Be patient.
Mhm.
And obviously, the one that seems so obvious, but we often forget, is pray. Just pray for him and for his
Absolutely.
heart, that God would open his heart to hear what God is saying to him and the words that you're trying to speak.
Yeah, we talk a lot about being a student of your spouse, and I think that you're saying, how do I say it for the wives? How do they say that in a way that their husband's going to hear? Because
Yes.
they we do get defensive as guys very easily. Our ego gets in the way. All this junk that we deal with as guys, and so how is the best way to talk to your husband? And really, I would say be prayerful about that, and ask God to give you the right words, right timing. I think timing is always important. You don't want to
Yes.
talk about it when he's on the way out the door. You got to have time
Very
to
true.
sit down and just talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. And I love that Sarah said that she's still learning, because I think it is. I think it's ongoing process for us with our spouses to continue to learn about them. How do we communicate better? How do we love better? All those things
Yeah.
that I think that's why there's the marriages that last a lifetime because
Yep.
of doing that over and over.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and what you're going to be doing in the next couple of years.
Yeah. I'm always writing a little bit of music, sometimes for myself and sometimes for other artists. But one of the cool things I've just gotten to do over the past few months is write and produce a biblical truth memorization kids album
Wow.
for Summit Ministries out of Colorado Springs. So that's been a neat project. And then I'm also launching a curriculum. It's a short booklet with some videos for an organization that is a fatherhood program for dads in unplanned pregnancies. And so, encouraging, it's really a call to step up to be a father and the joy of being a father, and some practical and spiritual advice on that journey. So that's been really exciting, and I'm still out doing
Oh, I
events.
love
So
that.
yeah,
I,
so it's a lot of things, but
A lot of good things.
rewarding.
No, when you said that about for the fathers, I don't think there's anything out there for them that I
Yeah,
know of. I think
there's
there's a number of men that fall in that category.
yes, absolutely. So we're really trying to develop something really powerful and simple, but very engaging to the heart,
Absolutely.
for those guys who come into these pregnancy resource centers and they're told their voice doesn't matter, their choice doesn't matter,
Yeah.
and so we're trying to engage them to find the calling and realize how much they really do matter.
Absolutely. They do matter so much. Last question. So what are you and Sarah enjoying most in your marriage right now?
Yeah, wow, that's a really good question. For us, man, I'm actually enjoying the fruits right now. We've been married for 21 years at this
Wow.
point, which to some seems like a long time, and to other folks seems like very short amount of time. Um, so we are enjoying, I would say, the fruit of faithfulness to one
Mm,
another, faithfulness to the conversation. That has been really difficult. We, like everybody else, at times have thought, gosh, would it just be easier to walk away from this and get
yeah.
out of this mess and, go find another life? It's like we all think those thoughts. One of the things that somebody said to me one time, they said is, if the grass looks greener on the other side, water your own grass.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so
I
good.
love that saying. And we've spent a lot of hard work watering our grass. And it's starting to become greener finally, and especially in this communication area. And so we, for a lot of years, had um, really difficult communication, especially conflict. We struggle with conflict resolution.
Hmm.
And we're finally to that point where we're learning the pattern to give space where space is needed, give apology where apology is needed, give listening ears where listening ears, and affirmation and validation and all that part of that
Yeah.
process that has made our communication so much better. So I think we're just enjoying the sweetness of more peace in our communication. And as our kids are getting bigger, our oldest just turned 16. And
Wow.
so now we're able to pass some of the wisdom to them as they prepare for their life. So,
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that because I think so many couples give up early in their marriages today.
yeah,
And for your and Sarah's story, that you persevered through those things and now you're reaping the benefits. Sometimes I think in our instant gratification culture, we want those to happen right now, but the work's worth it, right? And what you
absolutely.
invest in it, yeah,
Yeah, just
to
gets
get where
better
you
and
are
better
now.
when you can, right? When you can make it through.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what saddens me when I see couples get divorced at a young few years in their marriage. They're not going to get to where you and Sarah are,
Yeah,
and it's so rewarding when you get there.
it is.
It's very good. Well, the book is Leading Me, Finding Courage to Fight for Your Marriage, Children, and Faith. It's available everywhere. MattHammitt.com, is that the best way to find
Yep.
you? It looked to
Yep.
me like,
Yeah,
because I was on
absolutely.
there, everything Matt Hammitt is on there.
Yep.
Like,
You'll find me real easy. Yeah.
all
That's
kinds
right.
of things like that. Thank you for spending time with us today. Thanks for sharing your story. Encourage everybody to grab that book. It's going to be something that will be have an impact on your life.
Thanks so much for having me, Dr. Kim.